What's up, church? I've got a really cool video that I wanted to show you this week. In addition to being a preacher and making fart jokes on the internet, I also run social media accounts. And one of my clients is the National Ranger Memorial Foundation. There is a memorial on Fort Benning. If you know Fort Benning, it's behind MCOE, the Maneuver Center of Excellence. And it is a memorial specifically for Rangers. And so I work with the Ranger Memorial Foundation to bring attention to what they do in the Ranger community, both in the memorial, in scholarships, and also over the last few years, there's been a lot of work by the Memorial Foundation in lawsuits and things, trying to make sure that the names of Rangers stay on the memorial based on, the current political climate and the changing of names of bases and so forth. Thankfully now it seems as though that is on the way out, and we're able to kind of focus on the other works of the Memorial Foundation right now. But nonetheless, I work with the National Ranger Memorial Foundation, and about a month ago, or no, it was probably, I'd say 3 or 4 months ago now, I got an email from the Memorial Foundation. Blair over there, who is in charge of the Memorial Foundation, does an amazing job. He is an awesome dude. But I got an email that said, hey, we're putting together this reunion for these military guys back from Vietnam. We need to start promoting it and so forth. So we started promoting it and getting the word out and so forth. And I really did not know what it was about. I did minimal research on it just so that I could get my head around how to promote the event. But as we got closer to the event, I started seeing more comments online on the memorial's social media and so forth. And I thought, man, I really want to really dive deep and try to figure out, try to learn about these men and what they did. It was the 55th Son Tay Raider reunion. In Vietnam, there was a POW camp named Son Tay that was built that housed somewhere around 200 American soldier POWs. And a man by the name of the Bull, who was pretty high up in the United States military. Again, I'm not military, okay? I don't claim to be. I work with the Memorial Foundation. And so I get to meet all these amazing guys, but I don't really understand, the hierarchy in the military and so forth. And I'm not trying to put forward that I do. But anyways, the American leadership realized that they could probably go and get these guys out. And so that's what they did. They went to Fort Bragg and they took volunteers, and then they screened those volunteers, and I believe they came up with about 100 guys that were going to go in, and they were going to train and get ready for this raid, and then they were going to go to Vietnam, and they were going to get our guys out. And so they did all the training, and dude, the stories of the guys that were involved and hearing them, there's actually a documentary that has come out about the raid. But the stories of the men were, these guys, it is one thing to serve our country. It is a completely different thing to volunteer, knowing, I believe it was a particularly dangerous mission. That's all they were told about this mission. It's another thing to completely put yourself on the back burner, put your family on the back burner, and volunteer for a particularly dangerous mission. To go and get these guys out. And they went and they trained, and then they went in, and sadly, they executed a flawless raid. It is now one of the training materials for people at West Point, for guys at West Point that are learning how to lead soldiers. Their raid was absolutely perfect. However, when they got there, there were no POWs there. And so this event was the final annual reunion of the Son Tay Raiders. They're getting older now. They're not able to travel as easy. A lot of them have passed on. Majority of them have passed on. And so they wanted to do one last reunion that was Just blow the doors off this thing. Make it as big as you possibly can. And so they did that. The Ranger Memorial Foundation, along with Black Rifle Coffee Company, Invicta Financial Group, the National Infantry Association, put on this giant reunion. They had all of the guys come back to Fort Benning, where a lot of them had trained during their time in the military. And they put on this amazing event. One of the nights was the banquet, where we went to the National Infantry Museum and we had a banquet in their honor. A couple hundred people showed up, bought tickets. We had a meal and they had talks. And one of those talks really hit home. In addition to all of the amazing things that the Sante Raiders did, one of those talks was by a man by the name of Colonel Ellis. Colonel Lee Ellis. Hey, that's a good first name. Anyways, Colonel Ellis was one of the POWs at Sante. And he talked about the benefits of the raid, even though they were not liberated, because the North Vietnamese had moved them a few days, as far as I can tell, a few days before the raid. But what he talked about, I'm sitting there in this beautiful infantry museum with all these amazing military guys, talking with them, learning their history, not just the Sante Raiders, but just all these guys that were there, all these soldiers, men and women that have done so much for our country. And then Colonel Ellis stands up and he starts talking. And the main point of his talk was that even though we weren't there, even though we weren't liberated, what the Sante Raiders did forced the North Vietnamese to move all of those prisoners to a place called the Hanoi Hilton. And it caused them to be able to be with people that they had not seen in years at this point. When Colonel Ellis was moved from Sante, he had been at Sante for 2 years. This man, I believe it was almost like 6 or 7 years that he was a POW in Vietnam. And a lot of those guys that were POWs hadn't even been in a cell with another American for a very, very long time. They had been tortured. They had been isolated from their fellow soldiers. But the Sante raid showed the North Vietnamese that if you have American soldiers, we're coming to get them. And you better figure that out. And so they moved them to the Hanoi Hilton. And because of that move, they were able to reunite together. He talked about how they had Bible study, they had church, they had class. They were putting on school classes for each other. They were encouraging. At one point in the talk, he even talks about that the entire time they were at the Hanoi Hilton, there were only like a couple of fights among American soldiers. And these are guys that, you know, their bravado is well earned, right? But they weren't fighting with one another. They were encouraging one another. They had been tortured tremendously, but the Sante raid kind of put them back together. And he talks about how when you are going through extreme circumstances, having people around you is the most important thing. And as I'm sitting there in the infantry museum and I'm hearing him talk, I'm thinking of it from a preacher's perspective. These men had been tortured. They were away from their families. There was every reason for these men to just give up. But because they were with other people, they were able to keep going. And a lot of times in my comments on socials, I get a lot of questions, a lot of comments about, well, I just don't see why I need the church. Hebrews chapter 10 says that we should gather together, verse 24 through 26, that we should gather together to encourage one another. That our worship services should be a time when people who are tormented by the world come together and have that same kind of mentality that the Sante Raiders caused those POWs to have. I'm with my brothers and sisters. I'm here in a building that is just sticks and stones, but it matters because I'm with people that understand me, that are on the same path as me. And as I'm sitting there, I got a little choked up thinking about what they went through and the correlation between that and Christianity and that in the church, and why it is so important for us to gather together, why it is so important for Christians to have a chance to be around each other, so that if we are tortured by the world or by our lives or by circumstances or what have you, that we can be together and encourage one another is the most important thing. That's why Jesus built the church. That's why in John 16 he says that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. There's nothing that can stop the church if we're acting like Christians. Sadly, a lot of people today have given up on church. They've given up on gathering with other Christians because the actions of Christians are not reflecting what it's supposed to be. We need each other. We need to encourage one another. We need to be close to one another because we are tormented by this world. We are tortured by this world. But if we can come together and have that fellowship and that camaraderie and that communion with one another, those POWs are a perfect example of that. And so what I wanted to do is I'm just going to show you Colonel Ellis's talk. I want to thank the National Ranger Memorial Foundation for allowing me to use this video for this purpose. I know it was not the intended purpose of the Sante Raider reunion or the banquet or Colonel Ellis being there, but I reached out to him and they said, absolutely, you can use this clip. So it's about 7 minutes long. Please stick around. And after it's over, I want you to do one thing. I want you to go and research the Sante Raid. Those men are examples to all of us of what it means to be a true American patriot. Those POWs are examples to all of us of what it means to have a common goal and to be able to persevere with that common goal. And even if you're not in the military, I think the story of the Sante Raid has really changed my outlook, and hopefully it will change yours as well. So let's jump over. Let's watch Colonel Ellis's talk. And don't forget, I'm praying for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite retired United States Air Force fighter pilot, Colonel Lee Ellis, to the podium. Lee is a University of Georgia ROTC graduate. Go Dogs. He's a Vietnam veteran who was a F-4 Charlie Phantom pilot on his 53rd combat bombing mission in North Vietnam. Lee and his aircraft commander were shot down. Lee was a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton from November 67 to March 73. Upon his repatriation, he returned to active duty and served in command and staff positions, retiring with 25 years of service. Colonel Ellis.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here and to honor the Sante Raiders. And I thank you all for coming tonight, and it's been a wonderful evening. And thank you so much. You do a great job of emceeing, and I know you do a lot of other things well. I wanted to explain to you very quickly what happened for the Sante Raiders. And I want to explain this because they know, but a lot of you other military people don't know, and I want the families to know, for the Sante Raiders to remember what they did. Because we weren't there. in the camp that night. I had lived at Sante the whole time it was open, 2 years. And we had moved out because of the pressure on the communists in North Vietnam from around the world, and especially from the women back home, the wives and families had put them under pressure. And so they stopped the torture, and they built, resurfaced or recalibrated a prison, built a prison near Sante, about 7 miles away. And we had moved there, and we had 205 in 4 camps all together. And that night, we heard the Sante Raiders coming, but we didn't know what was happening. Well, within 48 hours, they moved us back to the Hanoi Hilton, but they moved out Vietnamese prisoners. Now, the Hanoi Hilton, Hoa Lo, was built by the French in the 1890s. It was the city jail, and it was also prison for POWs. It had one area, we call it, we named it the divisions of it after hotels in Las Vegas, because a lot of fighter pilots have been to Las Vegas to fly there and been gambling there. Back then, you could go to a gambling place in Las Vegas, Thunderbird, the Mint, whatever, and you could eat for $2 or $3 because they wanted you to come gamble there. But anyway, so we went back to the Hanoi Hilton, and they moved the Vietnamese prisoners out, and we were in 7 cells. Most of us were in 7 cells that had 40 to 60 guys in it. And I went in a cell with 55 guys for almost 2 years until toward the end of the war. And so in those cells, it was about 17 or 1,800 square feet in that cell. And can you imagine 55 fighter pilots and air crews living in a 17 or 1,800 foot house with no walls? And so what happened was that we started getting healthy. And we had, every day, we wanted to get healthy before we went home. And so we had church every Sunday. We were memorizing Bible verses from somebody's memory. We had Monday, Wednesday, Friday school classes, 3 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night in the afternoon, and Tuesday, Thursday, and we went that for 2 months, and we'd take a 2-week break, and we were playing bridge and chess in there, and we started sharing, and we only had twice in almost 2 years when one guy yelled at another guy. And these were strong egos, you know, but we had all been tortured. And that bouncing back from torture and being accepted by your buddies was very powerful. So I want you all to remember that when you suffer, if you stay positive and believe that someday you're going to get out of the suffering, and you are surrounded with people that believe in you and care about you and are willing to take risk for you, and you're committed to something that very honorably, we were all committed to the code of conduct, then you're going to bounce back. And that's what we did. And so what the Sante Raiders did was they put us in a good situation that we got healthier and healthier every day. And now we're outliving our peers. We have lower PTSD than other combat veterans from the Vietnam War, and since then, from every combat experience. We have lower PTSD. We're outliving our peers. Our average age is 86, and 25% of us are over 90. And I'm the youngest guy. I was the 3rd youngest guy in the Hanoi Hilton for 400 guys, about 400 guys. And so I'm only 82, so now. But it's so important. What the Sante Raiders did, they came back empty-handed. They had trained and executed perfectly, but they didn't get what they wanted to achieve. But it paid off. And that's what you want to remember. Something you do when you execute your mission as well as you can, someday it's going to bounce back and come back strong. And I want to encourage you to do that, and I want to thank the Sante Raiders, and I want to encourage people to honor them forever because of what they did for our country and especially for the POWs. Thank you, and God bless.